Okay, so we're assuming now in our the course of litigation that the other side has not decided to meet the demands of your client. And so, how does a lawyer then initiate a lawsuit? And the document that initiates a lawsuit is called a complaint. A complaint is basically like an indictment or an information in the sense that it gets the ball rolling. It is the document that alleges the facts that gave rise to the cause of action. But before we talk about complaints, we need to look at the federal rules of civil procedure. We're going to be focusing on the federal rules of civil procedure in the sense that they're kind of the rules that the states use as a model oftentimes. But you should know that there are, of course, federal rules of civil procedure, and each state has its own rules of civil procedure. So the Missouri rules of civil procedure might be very similar to the federal rules, but there are differences. But for our purposes, we're going to focus on the federal system, but just know that each state has its own set of rules. But what I'd like you to do is take a minute and go back to the Public Library of Law website that we've used before. And I want you to look up the federal rules of procedure. You'll notice there's a tab for court rules. And court rules, the federal rules of civil procedure, were promulgated by the United States Supreme Court. Now, the Congress could have vetoed or had the opportunity to veto new rules or rules of civil procedure, but the Supreme Court is responsible for those rules. But go ahead and take a minute to see how where those federal rules of civil procedure are. And in fact, if you could, find the rule of civil procedure that tells us what must go into a federal complaint. What are the components? What are the requirements? It might take you a few minutes to look through the federal rules of civil procedure in the context of what needs to go into a federal complaint. And then you can answer, I'll give you a couple of questions to answer about it, and then we'll come back there. I also want you to look on the website. You'll notice that you could access each state or the federal system, but that within the federal system, there are links to, for example, the 8th Circuit or the 11th Circuit. So you should realize that there are the larger national federal rules of civil procedure, and those rules tell you how you go about practicing law in federal courts generally. For example, what must be in a federal complaint in order for it to be valid. It also tells you, who or what devices are available in discovery. It tells you what motions are available. It's the rules governing practice, the procedure, right? But that each courthouse, each court, for example, the 8th Circuit here in St. Louis, has its own local court rules. And those local court rules might just might have different requirements, but oftentimes they're the smaller rules, but lawyers also have to follow those rules. So take a minute, find the rule that tells me as a lawyer what must be in a complaint substantively, and then we'll come back.